Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in our midweek Hebrew word study. Apologize for missing the past couple of weeks. Had some family things that came up, and just one of those things that happen. But so glad to be back. And what I'd like to do is just kind of recap a little bit because, if you remember, we are in the book of Daniel, chapter 2. And Daniel has had, not Daniel, but the king Nebuchadnezzar has had this dream. And because he is not sharing the dream, and he wants his wise men, his advisors, to tell him the dream and then tell him the interpretation. Of course, this isn't working so well, and the king's upset, and he goes and issues a decree to, kill all of his advisors because he believes they're all phonies. And so Daniel asks for a little time to go and pray. God gives him the interpretation, or gives him the understanding and the interpretation. And so he makes I'll call it a proclamation or a time of exhortation, of just thanking God, of blessing God and praising God for giving him this understanding. And we read through this in the last session, but there was a part about it that I noticed in the commentary that I didn't get a chance to go into. And so I want to just touch on that a little bit. And you can see it here in verse 20. And this is again Aramaic, which is similar to Hebrew, but not quite the same. Some of the words are the same. Anah answered Daniel, and it's Ba'amar and said, and then the word we're going to look at is leheve, and it's Hebrew number 1934, which is translated as to be, come to pass, come into being, to let be known. And it's translated as the word be. It's thought of as being in a imperfect, which means it's not yet completed. So Hebrew doesn't have tenses like past or present or future. It uses understandings of what's completed and what hasn't been completed. And that causes a lot of concern for us in English-speaking realm when we see words that sometimes are challenging to be translated into English. The main one that comes to mind is the word where it says be perfect. You remember that coming up a lot of times in your reading. Well, in Hebrew, it's meant to be ye complete. And so, because in Hebrew there is no understanding of present, past, or tense, it's what's done, what's completed, and what's not yet completed. And so that word perfect is, better thought of as being complete in him. And so that's where this plays in here, that this word is thought to be imperfect. It's not yet completed. But what the commentators point out, and I'm going to go into the um, Hebrew commentator book that we have right now, and you'll see I have circled in yellow that same word we were just looking at, the leheve. And down below here, they say it's been suggested that this word is actually in a jussive form, which means somewhat of a um, strong, has stronger connotation behind it. It's something that's a little bit more, it's not passive, it's a little more active. And they're also purporting here that the lettering has been changed because of its resemblance to the Tetragrammaton, which is the Yud-He Vav-He, sometimes translated, maybe not completely known to be accurate, as Yahweh. So they're saying that this word to be has some references to that. And so that's what caught my attention as we look at this. And of course, when we open it up and unpack it, it is just the word to be. It's obviously pointing out that it's in Aramaic, but it is very similar when we think back to Exodus chapter 13, excuse me, chapter 3, verse 14, where God appears to Moses in the burning bush and says, I am that I am. And you can see that very clearly here in the verse. You'll see that the word Ehyeh is very similar to what Daniel is quoting. And of course, this word here also means to be, to come to pass. So it's the Hebrew word. And so I can see where the sages in their commentary on Daniel caught this right away. And so what would happen if we looked at this from a standpoint of, what Daniel was saying, and instead of saying, um, lehe meaning to be, what if we inserted Yahweh or the tetragrammaton, and it would fit perfectly. And so it would be, and Daniel said, Yahweh, the name of God, be blessed. And so it fits perfectly. I could see why the commentators thought of that. And again, because this is written in Aramaic, um, we would expect that the name for God in Aramaic, which is the equivalent of Yahweh, would be Maryah. And we don't see Maryah here, but again, knowing that Daniel, even though he was speaking Aramaic, definitely had a Hebrew background. They read the Hebrew scriptures, they would know the name Yahweh, and they would know the story of the burning bush. And so, could it be that Daniel is trying to put a little bit more emphasis here as he's addressing God personally by his personal name of the Yud He Vav He? And so that's what the Hebrew commentators thought, and why they felt it was maybe changed to protect that name of God in this exhortation by Daniel. So again, does it mean a lot? Quite not sure, but it does give us another indication of how beautiful the language is, and being able to study it in its original language. You see things that are not easily translated and not noticed when it's translated into English. So continuing with that, we just see that this is such a beautiful, beautiful portion of Scripture, which we went through last time. We're going to look back at the commentator sages and see what they say. Again, they expound just some of the beautiful things of um, being God being from everlasting to everlasting, having all wisdom and knowledge alone. Verse 21 of where he changes times and seasons and removes kings and sets up kings. We're going to see this comes to play very emphatically with Nebuchadnezzar and what happens later on in his kingdom. So there's a little bit of prophecy going on here. Changing of times. What does that what does that really mean? Um, is it time, in fact, of, you know, the time as we think of it? They obviously didn't have watches, they didn't have atomic time that we, base our lives off of, basically. They did have sundials, they knew the rising and the setting, they knew approximate times of day, what the middle of the day was. They were also in an area closer to the equator, so the days and times did not change as drastically as we have here. Noticing, we are heading into fall, and the amount of daylight is drastically changed from when sunrise to sunset. It was more constant back in the time of the Middle East, closer to the equator. So again, trying to get in their mind and seeing what they're thinking, but obviously, this is just such a beautiful time of praise. Here they call it Daniel's doxology, which I think is probably a better way to place it and to think about it. So, what's happening here, of course, is where we left off, is Daniel then goes to Arioch, um, and they run to the king in haste, and you know, they want to save their lives. They want to make sure that no one is killed. We don't know how many people were affected by this, but we do know that Daniel did care about the other wise men, and so that they wouldn't be destroyed. And so we kind of pick up in verse 25 here. And I thought, what I noticed as I'm reading this, um, is that they're describing what this guy is doing. And he brought Daniel before the king, and this guy Arioch makes this proclamation, and he said to the king, Di Hashkechat Gevar mean, and then he uses the word b'nai, geluta. And the word b'nai, of course, is very common in Hebrew, and it means children of. It's in a construct form, which gives you the children of. But I found it very interesting to see here that Bible Hub translated this as captives. And so, why did they do this? Why would you put of the captives of the captives? It's a redundant sentence. And so when we go back to the Hebrew commentary, he translates it as it is found, a man of the children of the captivity of Judah. So that piqued my interest, thinking, okay, well, why would this English translation, and it's a very well-known translation, why would they change it and take away the b'nai or the children of? Um, Going back and thinking of the groundwork that was laid here of the circumstances they're under, Daniel and the three Hebrew children, as they're called, had been in Babylon for many, many years, thought to be like 70 some years. And so they were old men. They were not children by any stretch of the imagination. And I guess what I'm thinking of here is this might have been a derogatory slur. This might have been um, something that was meant to demean them, knowing and understanding the full value of this situation here, that the Babylonians were in charge. They had captured people who were now their slaves, and they were serving the king, serving the country. And this could have been a racial slur. Unfortunately, we still can probably remember many of them from our past here in the United States, and how slavery had such a terrible impact, and the terrible things that were said about those African Americans who were captured as slaves, and some of the verbiage that was used to demean them and to make them feel like they had a lower position. And so they would call them children and use terms of the names of children and types of children in reference to them, even though they were full grown. They may have been elderly people. It was used as a term of degradation and demeaning, and of prejudice. And so I think our translators tried to cover that up here, but the Hebrew commentators were very much aware of this, and especially in light of what's going on with all the anti-Semitism in the world today, there's just a little bit of understanding we can gain from the Jewish sages, that they understood what it meant to be marginalized. They understood what it meant to be um, prejudiced against. They understood what anti-Semitism was about. And so they weren't going to let this opportunity just be covered and softened. They pointed out in most the strong terms of what the verse really says. And so that's a little interesting tidbit. Of course, seems that the um, captain of the guard was meaning to demean Daniel, and but yet in the whole realm of things, we see that God definitely sticks up for Daniel and the captives. And so here he makes a proclamation that he's found someone who can interpret the king, and then verse 26 says, Ane Malka Amar, and the king said, La Daniel. Um, and then what's interesting here, again, the whole narrative changes. We know that they were given different names, Babylonian names, and the king doesn't even refer to Daniel with his Hebrew name. He jumps right into the Babylonian name. And so he says, D. Shemay, which is name, Belteshazzar, translated, Belteshazzar, and speaks to him in that way, and then speaks to him, Ayitaik, are you ready to, are you able, Kahel, Lehoda, Utani, make known unto me, Chelenma, the dream is very similar to Cholam in Hebrew for a dream, and Di Fazet Ufshire, and give me the interpretation. And Daniel answers and said, you know, the secret that the king has demanded, the wise men couldn't answer, neither could your astrologers, musicians, your soothsayers, basically everybody else that you had put all your trust in, everyone else you had counseled with, everyone else you believed in, could not answer you. But then verse 28 is so cool. It says, but there is a God and in heaven who reveals the secrets and made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what, and then here the wording is very strange again, what who will be in the latter days, until we notice that this word is leheve. It's the same word that we just looked at earlier. And so if we look at that and substitute the name of God as the Jewish sages thought, it would read, and Yahweh, or he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what, who is Yahweh and who Yahweh will be in the latter days. Understanding as we looked ahead, maybe knowing that bad times are going to come upon Nebuchadnezzar. He's going to be dethroned, and Nebuchadnezzar will go through some really terrible stuff in his life later on. And when he comes back to his normal self, he will acknowledge that Yahweh is the one true God of the world and of his kingdom. And so this is, again, maybe a little bit of a hidden prophecy of Daniel uh, speaking in language that God has given him, that Nebuchadnezzar will eventually learn who the one true God is, and that Daniel is giving God all the credit for the vision that's come upon him, come upon the king, and the vision that Daniel had and the interpretation of it. And so Daniel starts to tell him and said, here are your thoughts while you were on your bed. And these are things that are going to come to pass, and that God is the one who reveals the secrets and reveals what is made known to you. And we're going to stop there because we want to come back next week and get into this dream that Daniel is about to interpret and share with the king. But Daniel is very, very clear, making it known that he does not do this of his own strength, that it is God that has set this all up, caused the dream, caused this whole situation, caused this whole realm to come into play, where Daniel has the understanding, all that God can make known his glory to all of mankind, even though the children of Israel are in bondage, even though they are having hard times, even though they're displaced from their country. God is still there and God is still working. And of course, those are all thoughts that are applicable to us in our life, no matter where we are, what we're going through, to be reminded of these very wonderful things that God is always with us. So God bless you. I hope you enjoy this study, and glad to be back on track with things, and hope you have a wonderful week and look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.